What's up fellow nerds, I'm your host Dr. McKay and welcome back to my channel. In today's video I want to break down the full history of the Wraith, before I dive into a video covering the war with the Lanteans. So in this video I will cover the origins of the Wraith and their history to the present day. I'll be using information sourced from the shows and the extended materials like the novels, and try and bring all the information into a comprehensive timeline of events. So it's going to be a long video. But before we get started, if you like the content, please feel free to like, comment and subscribe for more. And with that said, let's go. Before I begin, there is not much really known of the origins of the Wraith within the show outside of speculation and theory. However, in the legacy novels titled Secrets, we learn a great deal more. However, as some people don't consider the novels to be canon, I will do two separate origins for the Wraith in this video and let you the viewer decide for yourself which origin is your preferred canon. So with that distinction made, let's begin. The first origin of the Wraith is through eons of evolution. So around 7 million years ago, when the Alterans left the Milky Way galaxy and travelled to the Pegasus galaxy, they found a galaxy void of sentient life. They settled on a world and named the planet Lantia, and so became the Lanteans. Over the next few million years, they spread out into the galaxy and seeded many worlds with human life and spread far, reaching all corners of the galaxy. On one of the worlds in the far reaches of the galaxy, the Lanteans encountered a creature later named the Wraith bug on the planet. This bug would go mostly unnoticed by the Lanteans, but due to the new human presence, this bug suddenly had a new food source. The Wraith bug began to ensnare humans and began to prey upon them, feeding on their life energy, allowing the bugs to extend their lives and heal all injuries. A unique ability for sure. The Wraith bug, over the millions of years of feeding, would begin to absorb human DNA into their own, and with each new generation of bugs spawned, they began to change and began taking on characteristics of the humans they fed upon. Until around 100,000 years ago, according to Todd, the first humanoid wraiths hatched and awoke. It's unclear on the development of the first Wraith over the next 100,000 years, but what we do know is they learnt and studied Lantean technology and developed interstellar spaceships and advanced technology fitting into their society. And when the time was right, they left their corner of the galaxy and began to spread out, coming into contact with the Lanteans and entering a war with them, that saw the Wraith drive the Lanteans out of the galaxy and take control of it. This origin is riddled with much speculation and theory from within the show, from the little evidence they discovered along the way, and for me, I need more information. There is far too much missing information to properly make a timeline of events given the time frame of millions of years to 100,000 years, so I will leave the evolution origin there for you to ponder. Next, we will cover the origins in the novel's Secrets. This origin is revealed in the legacy novels, mainly Secrets and Furies, so go check them out. So around 11,000 years ago, roughly 900 years before the Lanteans evacuated Atlantis, a group of Lanteans, including the Lantean Janus, sought out a means to make the Lanteans immortal in case ascension could not be achieved. They began experimenting on these alien squids, seeking a way to slow the human aging, and during the experiments the squids gained some abilities, but nothing of what the Lanteans wanted, so they abandoned the experiments on the squids and decided to experiment on humans directly. This was explained in the novel From the Depths. So the Lanteans, seeking out immortality and knowing of the Wraith bug's abilities, along with other knowledge that could aid them, decided to kidnap 100 male and 100 female humans from around the galaxy and experiment on them. They became prisoners and test subjects and was subjugated to genetic augmentation to find a way to create immortality. In these experiments, the Lanteans used DNA of other creatures, mainly the Eratus bug, given its abilities. They spliced together this Eratus bug DNA with human DNA to create something new. The results of the experiments saw all but 9 of the female subjects die in the experiments, while only 1 male died, leaving 99 males surviving. With the humans now transformed into something else, they began discovering they had new abilities, and eventually used their new telepathic abilities on the Lantean guards and escaped the prison. They killed the guards and stole the facility's ZPM, and a weapon created and designed to kill them. They then fled through the Stargate to Athos, and before the Lanteans could catch them, they disappeared into the galaxy. Over the next 100 years, the Lanteans pursued the Wraiths, hunting them down, but to no avail, even resorting to holding their families hostage to lure them out. The Wraith's new abilities made it too difficult for the Lanteans. The Wraith continued to avoid capture, and out of the need to survive, began to steal Lantean ships and technology, and then began to adapt it to their needs. The 108 Wraith fled to unknown space and began to adapt to their new physiology. They then began to feed on humans, driven by the hunger within, and soon the 9 females asserted themselves as queens and formed 9 different factions. They then split the 99 males into their factions and began to breed, creating more Wraith comprised mostly of drones and males, with the rare instance of a female. They used the stolen ZPM to power their early facilities and began to grow ships until the ZPM ran out of power. They hid the weapon designed to kill them and began to build, driven by a genetic inherited hatred for the Lanteans for what they did to them. They focused on creating an army and built many ships, and 800 years later, the Wraith, now ready with a huge force, they began to move out of their corner of the galaxy and began to lay siege to human worlds in Lantean territory, attracting the attention of the Lanteans, and soon declared war against them. In this section, I will be brief, as I will be doing a dedicated video on the war next. So, 100 years before the Lanteans evacuated Atlantis, the Wraith emerged from their corner of the galaxy and took the Lanteans by surprise. The Lanteans, overconfident in their technology, engaged the Wraith head-on, winning a few early engagements, but the Wraith had the numbers and kept coming. Very quickly, the Lanteans were being pushed back, losing outlying planets and territory to the Wraith due to the Wraith's sheer numbers. However, the Lanteans' technology was far superior to the Wraith, and soon a stalemate began to take place, with the Lantean defences holding the line. With the stalemate with the Wraith not really changing, the Lanteans, in their overconfidence, decided to press the attack and push deep into Wraith territory to try and break their lines. However, the Wraith capitalized on the Lanteans' arrogance and laid traps for the Lanteans, seizing Lantean warships being powered by ZPMs. The Wraith's traps worked, and they managed to steal a few ZPMs and immediately began work on several cloning facilities and increased ship production tenfold, and within a short amount of time, the Wraith re-emerged with a huge force, completely outnumbering the Lanteans. The Lanteans, overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of the Wraith, lost many ships and worlds, and with no way to win against the Wraith's overwhelming numbers, began to fall back, losing all of their territory to the Wraith, until only Atlantis remained. And so, after a century of fighting and losing battles after battles, the Lanteans, seeing no way to win, made one last-ditch attempt for peace. They sent a convoy of the last remaining warships to negotiate for peace with the Wraith fleet, but it was too late. The Wraith had already won. They destroyed the convoy, sending a clear sign that peace was not an option. And with that final display, the remaining Lanteans evacuated the galaxy and returned to Earth, marking victory for the Wraith. The Wraith would then spread out all over the galaxy, asserting their dominance and destroying any advanced civilizations that remained. And once they was the only power in the galaxy left, they began cultivating the human populations that remained as livestock to feed their huge population. With the Wraith's victory over the Lanteans, and with them destroying any other advanced races, they could find, they set out to split the galaxy up into multiple feeding grounds, when suddenly, out of nowhere, a fleet of Lantian warships emerged from nowhere and began attacking the Wraith. Surprised by the sudden attack, as the Wraith were still fresh off their victory over the Lantians, the Wraith lost the first few battles to this new enemy, but quickly managed to coordinate and push back using their numbers like they did before. However, this time was different. No matter how many Lantian ships the Wraith destroyed, more always came. The Wraith were struggling to maintain their defenses when suddenly the Wraith discovered the truth. This new enemy was not human or Lantian, but machines. With this new revelation of the Asurans being machines, the Wraith began to worry that this war could not be won through military means, as the Asurans would just keep coming. So the Wraith needed a new plan. So they captured a few Asurans and began to study them. They soon discovered within their base code the directive that forces the Asurans to attack the Wraith. The Wraith immediately deactivated the directive, and soon all the Asurans pulled back to their home world, and the war was over. With the Wraith now victorious again, but taking serious losses, began to rebuild. However, with the Wraith's large numbers and overfeeding on their human herds, this would see the Wraith's food supply become unsustainable. So after the Wraith recovered from their losses, they would enter a cycle of hibernation and culling for the next 10,000 years. With the Wraith now the undisputed dominant force within the Pegasus Galaxy, they had one last problem to solve. Their population was far too great to sustain with their current food supply, so they decided to put 90% of their population into hibernation to allow the human world's populations to grow and repopulate. And when the populations of the human world would reach a high number, they would awaken from their hibernation and begin culling worlds, taking upwards of 80% of a planet's population before returning to hibernation. This cycle of death would happen every 1 to 200 years, and with this time gap, some generations of humans would live and die in that time without being culled at all. This cycle went on for thousands of years, and during that time, some human worlds would advance in technology just enough and attract the attention of the Wraith outside of the cullings and would be destroyed, so that the humans don't advance too far to challenge the Wraith. During this time, some humans would come to worship the Wraith, and from their loyalty be spared from feeding. Other humans that showed strength and resilience to the Wraith's feeding would be turned into Wraith runners. This sport would have humans fitted with tracking devices, and Wraith would make sport out of hunting these individuals. And lastly, some Wraith would make deals with few human worlds, allowing them to advance, but at a cost, with one world sacrificing their population by putting criminals on an island to be fed upon instead of the main population. Deals like these are rare, but happened. The Wraith would continue the cycle of death, doing all these things, going completely unchallenged, until in 2004, the Wraith would make a culling that would change them forever. In 2004, the Tauri's discovery of Atlantis and subsequent journey to Athos saw the Wraith cull Athos, taking a few expedition members with them. With the Tauri's mindset of never leave a man behind, they tracked down the Wraith and rescued the captured humans. However, in this first encounter, the Wraith learned of Earth with its huge human population, and with the death of the Queen, it sent a signal that awoke all of the Wraith in the galaxy. This early awakening saw many feeding grounds with not enough humans to go around, and with the Wraith awakening everywhere, it saw entire populations of humans culled. But with the knowledge of Earth's population, the Wraith didn't care. They went from one planet to the next, feeding until they built up a force, and 1 year later laid siege to Atlantis once more. The Tauri, being completely outgunned and outnumbered, managed beyond all odds to destroy 2 of the 3 hive ships. But just as all hope seemed lost, the Earth ship Daedalus arrived and destroyed the last remaining hive ship, while also supplying Atlantis with a ZPM. However, the Wraith had more ships. They gathered 12 hive ships together and began to travel to Atlantis. The Daedalus managed to intercept them and destroy several, but the Wraith countered their assault and drove the Daedalus back to Atlantis. Atlantis, now under siege from the Wraith with no way to stop them, came up with a plan to deceive the Wraith instead. They blew up a nuke over the city, and just as the blast dispersed, they cloaked the city, fooling the Wraith into believing the city was destroyed, and with that, the only way to find Earth was gone. With the Wraith believing the city destroyed, they left, but due to the early awakening and the preceding overcullings, the Wraith was left with not enough food to go around, and so the Wraith's natural territorial instincts kicked in, and with the lack of food, they began to fight amongst themselves and entered the first Wraith Civil War. After the attack and the belief that the city was destroyed, the Wraith began to fight amongst each other over feeding grounds, as there was not enough humans to go around. Small skirmishes broke out over planets, and soon the Wraith banded into multiple factions led by different queens. This saw the galaxy carved up into separate territories over feeding grounds, and saw the Wraith war with each other over territory. This civil war saw the Wraith distracted from controlling the galaxy, and it allowed the humans to begin cooperating and opposing the Wraith alongside the Atlantis expedition. And with the Atlantis expedition being a constant thorn in the side of the Wraith, the galaxy began to change. The Atlantis team also began work on a retrovirus to change Wraith into humans, which would be used multiple times, creating the Wraith-human hybrid Michael. They would also encounter a world developing a drug to prevent Wraith from feeding, which resulted in the Wraith dying after trying to feed, and with the Wraith focusing on each other, human groups like the Genii began to rise in power and influence. And during this time, the Atlantis expedition, mainly John Shepard, would befriend a Wraith, later named Todd, which would mark a path through diplomacy with the Wraith. But the Wraith were still in a civil war, and still the dominant force in the galaxy, and they still devastated many human worlds. But with the aid of the Atlantis expedition, the galaxy was fighting back, causing massive losses to the Wraith. So when in 2007, when Dr. Rodney McKay reactivated the Assyrians' directive to attack the Wraith was so unprepared for what was to come. In 2007, Dr. McKay's tampering with the Assyrian base code and reactivation of the attack directive saw the Assyrians once more war with the Wraith. This surprise attack caught the Wraith off guard and saw the Wraith sustain heavy losses in the opening days. However, the Wraith banded together once more and managed to fight back against the Assyrians, dealing losses to them. With the losses to the Assyrians began to change tactics and began attacking human worlds in an attempt to starve the Wraith out. This change of tactics was devastating and needed to be dealt with, and with the Wraith unable to turn off the command in the Assyrians base code due to McKay's tampering, was left with little options. However, the Atlantis expedition came up with a plan, and with the aid of Todd the Wraith, the Tauri and the Wraith forged an alliance, which also included a surprise addition of traveller ships. The plan was to engage the Assyrians over the homeworld and allow McKay to enact a plan to end them once and for all. The alliance was victorious and the plan worked, with the Assyrian world being destroyed. The alliance between the Tauri and the Wraith was over as soon as they jumped to hyperspace, but it showed cooperation was possible. After this conflict, the Wraith would go back to fighting each other over feeding grounds, but unknown to the Wraith, the galaxy would soon be turned on its head once more. Stirring in the shadows of the galaxy lurked a Wraith, human hybrid, an experiment gone wrong with no place in either world, seeking retribution. Michael the Wraith turned human and then reverted back to Wraith, shunned by both kinds, was secretly planning and gathering knowledge to attack the Wraith and humans alike. He obtained the Hoffen drug and modified it and secretly spread it to various human worlds. This drug prevented Wraith from feeding on humans, and in doing so it killed them after, but the drug had a 30% mortality rate in humans. This tainting of the Wraith's food supply saw the Wraith take a blow to their population, and not wanting to risk feeding on poisoned food, opted to destroy populations infected and hunt down any survivors. Michael was devious, and this was just the start. He had grander plans in mind, but was stopped by the Daedalus and the Atlantis team before he could enact his larger plans. But the damage of the Hoffen drug was already done. So Todd formed another alliance with the Atlantis expedition to come up with a cure, in which they did. But this still didn't stop the Wraith from hunting down all that was immune to feeding. However, the damage was done. The Wraith would now take a risk every time they fed, and with that risk, the fighting between each other increased over the few remaining food supplies that were safe. During the battle over Osiris, Todd the Wraith had a sneaky plan to steal several ZPMs to later use to gain the upper hand over the other factions of Wraith. So after the whole Michael problem, Todd began with one plan being to reactivate a cloning facility to gain more troops. However, Todd was betrayed and the facility was later destroyed by Shepard's team. Another plan from Todd was to use a ZPM to enhance his hive ship to make it a super hive to give him an advantage over the other Wraith, but again he was betrayed and once again sought the aid of the Atlantis team. The Tauri sent the Daedalus to engage and stop the super hive, but the hive was too powerful and crippled the Daedalus. But just before the hive could destroy the Daedalus, it picked up a signal with the location of Earth and immediately jumped to hyperspace. The Tauri deployed the Apollo and Sun Tzu to intercept the superhive, but both ships were left crippled in the attempt, leaving Earth defenseless. The only solution was Atlantis, and with the aid of Todd in securing the rest of the stolen ZPMs, Atlantis made the journey to Earth and helped stop the superhive before it could begin attacking Earth, leaving Atlantis with no other choice but to land on Earth. With the superhive being destroyed, it restored the balance of power within the Pegasus galaxy, and with Atlantis on Earth and not in the Pegasus galaxy, it left a power vacuum within the Pegasus galaxy that would see an old enemy return. This next section is from the Legacy novels and are not from the show's screen canon, but as this is a continuation story, I include it here, so here we go. With Atlantis on Earth and Todd's faction weakened by the many betrayals and the destruction of the superhive, a new Wraith Queen called Queen Death arose and began to forcibly unite hive ships under her command, and began to take over many Wraith territories, destroying anything she didn't keep. And over the next 6 months, she grew to become a major player in the Pegasus galaxy, creating a powerful Wraith alliance. With these new threats, the galaxy needed help, so Atlantis took flight once more and headed back to the Pegasus galaxy. But due to damage in the hyperdrive, Atlantis dropped out on the edge of the galaxy and discovered an ice world, where they would discover a Lantean facility. That was the birthplace of the Wraith. The Atlantis team would make this new world their home world and rejoin the galaxy, and began fighting Queen Death's forces. And during this time, she captured Rodney and transformed him into a Wraith, and forced him to upgrade the ships of Queen Death's fleet with shields. Meanwhile, the George Hammond, a BC-304, would be stationed in the Pegasus galaxy and assist in the battles with Atlantis. And Taylor would transform back into her Wraith Queen disguise, Queen Stillflower, to work with Todd in forming an alliance with other Wraith Queens against Queen Death's forces. Also during this time, the Jedi would come across a Lantean cruiser and attempt to repair it with the help of Atlantis, and after the repairs, Atlantis let the Jedi keep the ship. During this time, Atlantis would discover a weapon that would kill all the Wraith called Hyperion's weapon. This weapon would change hands a few times, but ultimately be destroyed to allow the formation of an alliance between the Tauri and the Wraith Queen Guide. Taylor, now Queen Stillflower, would form an alliance with the Wraith Queen's Osprey and learn through genetic memory of the true origins of the Wraith, and that the facility on Atlantis' new homeworld was the place they was made. Taylor would also rescue McKay from Queen Death, after McKay would get help from an ascended Dr. Weir to break his mind out of Death's control. The conflict with Queen Death would go on for some time, but it would eventually culminate in a battle in orbit over the frozen planet. The battle would see Queen Death's forces go up against Atlantis, the Jedi's new Lantian cruiser named the Pride of the Jedi, Taylor and Todd's Wraith Alliance, and the George Hammond. The battle would see Queen Death be killed by Taylor and the real truth discovered. Queen Death was just a figurehead. The true master behind the scenes was a Wraith called Ashes, one of the original Wraith created by the Lantians. She still held immense hatred and wanted revenge on the galaxy. Ashes was handed over to the Alliance of Wraith Queens for punishment, and the Alliance of Wraith, Tauri and Jedi would enter into an unprecedented new age of peace. After the conflict with Queen Death, the alliance between the Wraith Queens, the Tauri and the Jedi concluded, with the remaining Wraith forging a peace treaty with the Tauri, which saw the Wraith relinquish half of the galaxy to the Tauri, while keeping the other half to themselves. This was made possible due to the creation of a new retrovirus that strengthened human physiology to withstand the effects of Wraith feeding, allowing humans to survive the process. This provided a bridge to allow both humans and Wraith to survive together, as the Wraith cannot help their need to feed. The galaxy at large had no say in this treaty, as it was made by the Wraith and the Tauri, and not everyone was willing to accept it. But over time, hostilities died down, with only a few small outbursts here and there would remain with the Wraith, in which the Atlantis team would handle with diplomacy, making sure the Wraith honour the treaty. And so, with the galaxy split in two and there was peace for the most part for the galaxy entered into a new age, one a lot brighter than before. Well, there we go, my fellow nerds. This has been a complete breakdown of the Wraith's history, from their mysterious origins to their rise to a galactic power, their victories over the Lantians and the Asurans, and their in a way downfall by the Tauri and infighting amongst themselves, to the novel's extended stories, seeing the Wraith eventually forge peace. It's quite the story no matter how you interpret the Wraith's history. One thing is for certain, they are not inherently evil or bad. It's just their nature. They feed on humans to survive, not unlike how we farm animals for food. But because their food source is humans, we draw the line, and the whole ethical thing crops up. It's hard to not call the Wraith the bad guys. We are humans after all. But in the show, especially with Todd, the show shows us that Wraith are more than just monsters. They're intelligent, humorous, and can be reasoned with, and they know of friendship and honour too. For me, and my opinion, the Wraith are just surviving on their natural instincts, whether from evolution or experiments. Either way, it's how they live, and the show in the later seasons really do ask you the question of, are they evil, or are they just doing this out of the need for survival? But I will leave you, my fellow nerds, to debate the nature of the Wraiths being good or evil in the comments below. This has been a full history breakdown of the Wraith from Stargate Atlantis. I hope you all have enjoyed the content, and if you did, please feel free to like, comment and subscribe for more. I have been your host, Dr. McKay, and until the next video, I will catch you all then. Cheers and goodbye, and have a good rest of your day. Bye!